I was 32 the summer I decided to take a solo trip through a stretch of old woods in southern Oregon, not too far from a small place called Powers. I had just quit my job in Portland and needed a break from people, buildings, noise, everything. I packed up my gear and planned to hike deep into the national forest for a week, carrying enough supplies to stay off-grid the whole time. I'd read about an old campsite deep in the hills, one that hadn't been officially used in decades. It was marked on an outdated forestry map I found in a used bookstore months before. The place was called Dry Pine Flats. The name barely rang any bells online, and I couldn't find any recent info about it. That only made me more interested. I figured it would be quiet, untouched, and free of crowds. That was all I wanted. It took almost 6 hours to reach the start of the trail by truck, another 4 hours hiking with a heavy pack. The forest got thicker the deeper I went, and the trail was clearly not maintained anymore. Tree limbs hung low. The dirt was soft in places where water must have run during spring melt. I passed no one, saw no tracks. I felt like I was walking into a forgotten pocket of the state, and it was exactly what I'd hoped for. By the time I reached the clearing that I believed was once Dry Pine Flats, the sun was dipping low, painting the pine trunks with orange light. The site didn't look like much, just a large flat area tucked between hills, ringed by trees with a dry creek bed slicing through the far end. But when I looked closer, I noticed the remains of fire rings, a few moss-covered stumps that had clearly been used as stools, and an old, rusted metal sign half buried under pine needles. You could still make out the words "Campsite for Dry Pine." That confirmed it. I'd found the place. I set up my small tent near a cluster of trees where the ground was soft and dry. There was an eerie stillness to the whole area.
No birdsong, no breeze.
Just the occasional creak of branches and the sound of my own footsteps crunching over debris. Still, I pushed the unease away. I was alone, and that's what I wanted. I made a fire, ate a simple meal from my pack, and sat watching the flames until they died down into coals. That first night was quiet. I thought I heard movement in the woods once, around 3 in the morning, but it sounded like a deer or something moving through brush. I didn't leave the tent to check. I just stayed still, listening, eyes open in the dark. In the morning, I wandered the area more thoroughly. I found the remains of an old wooden table rotting into the ground and what looked like the shell of a latrine about 50 yards from the main clearing. Everything was falling apart, overtaken by moss and vines. The campsite had truly been abandoned a long time ago. Around noon, I hiked a mile up the ridge to get a better view of the land. I sat up there eating jerky, looking back down at the flat. The clearing looked so small from above, so hidden. I realized how far I was from anyone. No cell service, no satellite signal, nothing. That's when I noticed something that gave me pause. From the hill, I could see faint trails running in and out of the clearing. Not wide enough to be old roads, more like footpaths. Some of them weren't on any map I had, not even the old one. They looked like game trails at first, but something about them didn't sit right with me. They were too clean, too consistent in direction, like they had been used not too long ago. I told myself animals used them regularly, maybe elk or coyotes, but it nagged at me. That night, I kept the fire burning longer. I kept checking the tree line even though there was no reason to. The woods were quiet again, unnaturally so. Around midnight, I heard a sound behind my tent, just a stick cracking under weight. Not wind, not falling debris. Wait, I stood up, light in hand, and scanned the trees. Nothing moved. I circled the tent twice and found nothing. Still, I didn't sleep easy that night. In the morning, I found something that made me stop cold.
Boot prints.
Human boot prints. Not mine. They were off to the east side of the clearing, near the tree line. A single set of prints, large, maybe from a man, clearly going toward my camp and then turning away. The prints were deep in the soft earth, not old. No sign of them the previous day. My stomach dropped. I looked around, saw nothing else disturbed. My gear hadn't been touched. Nothing was missing, but those prints weren't mine. I hadn't walked over there at all since I arrived. I'd been careful to keep my movements central. I tried to reason it away. Maybe they were old. Maybe the wind had revealed them overnight. But the prints were fresh. The heel edges were clean. Something or someone had been close while I slept. I thought about packing up and leaving right then. But I didn't. I told myself I was overreacting. It was probably another hiker who passed through, maybe even a hunter just checking the area. They'd seen my camp and backed off. That was the logical answer. Still, the next night, I slept with my headlamp in hand and a long branch by my side. At around 2 a.m., I woke to something touching the tent. It wasn't an animal. It wasn't rustling or brushing, it was a deliberate press. Fingers, maybe. I didn't move. I just held my breath. The tent wall shifted again. Slightly, like someone was slowly dragging their hand along it. Then silence. I counted to 60. Then I unzipped the flap fast and leapt out with the light. My heart was hammering. I scanned the trees, the ground. Nothing. Just cold, open forest. I yelled out. Not with words, just a loud, angry noise. I wanted whatever it was to know I wasn't afraid, even though I was. I didn't sleep again that night. By morning, I'd made my decision. I was packing up and heading out. The peace I wanted wasn't worth this kind of stress. I started tearing down camp just after dawn. That's when I noticed more prints. Again near the edge of the clearing, and this time 2 sets. They circled wide around the camp, crossing near the old latrine. They hadn't come from the direction I'd arrived from. Whoever they were, they weren't hiking the same trails. They were moving through the woods in different ways only someone who knew this area would. As I packed the last of my gear, I found something that pushed me over the edge. It was hanging from a tree branch, an old sun-bleached backpack. It hadn't been there before. I was sure of it. I would have noticed. It wasn't mine. The pack was torn and crusted with dirt, maybe animal chewed, but it looked like it had been placed there, not dropped. Like someone had hung it deliberately. I didn't touch it. I didn't go near it. I threw on my pack, tightened every strap, and started down the way I came as fast as I could without running. The hike out felt longer. Every sound in the woods set me on edge. I kept looking back, scanning for movement, for shadows that didn't belong. I didn't see anyone, but I felt watched the entire time. When I finally reached my truck, I didn't rest. I threw everything in the back and drove straight out. I didn't stop until I hit cell service and sent a message to my brother letting him know I was safe and heading home early. I didn't tell him the full story. Not right away. I looked up Dry Pine Flats again when I got back to Portland. There was still nothing recent.
No warnings.
No news. But on a deep hiking forum, buried under years of posts, I found one short thread from 2004. A guy had tried to find the campsite back then. He wrote about finding strange paths, old gear, and the feeling that he wasn't alone. He'd cut his trip short too. No one replied to the thread. I haven't gone back. I still camp sometimes, but never that deep, never alone, and never in places that don't exist on current maps. Whatever Dry Pine Flats was, it wasn't abandoned. Not really. It just wasn't for people like me anymore, and I don't think it ever was. I was 26 when I did something I still don't fully understand. It was late autumn of 2009. The air was starting to bite more sharply at night, and most people I knew were beginning to settle into their cold weather routines. But I wasn't like them. I was restless, never liked sitting still too long. I'd quit a dull office job in Manchester just 2 weeks earlier, packed a rucksack, and started walking aimlessly. I told people I was trying to find myself, but that was just something I said so I wouldn't have to explain the truth. I didn't know what I wanted anymore. I just wanted to be away from everyone. I ended up near a place called Grindleton in Lancashire. A tiny village, really. I was passing through, following some unmarked trails, when I found an old graveyard nestled in a patch of trees just off the footpath. It wasn't part of any church grounds, at least not anymore. If it had been, the church was long gone. All that remained were uneven rows of crumbling headstones, some leaning to one side, some sunken deep into the mossy soil. Most of the names had been worn off by years of wind and rain. The surrounding trees were tall and dense, with a thick layer of yellow and brown leaves carpeting the forest floor. I don't know what made me stop there. Maybe it was the quiet, or maybe I just didn't feel like walking anymore. I'd been hiking since early morning and had only eaten a can of beans the whole day. It was already past 6 in the evening, and the sun was dipping low behind the trees. The place felt like it hadn't been touched in years, and I told myself it would be just for one night. It was peaceful in a way. No traffic, no people, no noise except for the occasional gust of wind shaking the branches. I pitched my small green tent on a patch of flatter ground behind a row of headstones, thinking it would shield me from the wind. I used a thin foam mat under my sleeping bag, but the cold from the ground still seeped through. I gathered some dry twigs and lit a small fire in an old rusted tin I found near a tree stump. It gave off just enough heat to keep my fingers from freezing while I opened another tin. Some cheap tin stew I'd carried from town. As the light faded, the sky turned a dark blue, and the shadows of the tall headstones began to stretch in every direction. I had a small torch and I kept it close, but I tried not to use it too much. I didn't want to waste batteries, and I figured my eyes would adjust to the dark. After eating, I sat for a while, knees pulled up to my chest, staring at the flickering fire in the tin. The cold crept in harder now, sharp and steady. The wind had died down almost completely, that kind of silence where even your own heartbeat feels too loud. I was starting to get sleepy, but something about the silence made me uneasy. I wasn't scared exactly, but I had this pressure in my chest, like I was being watched. I kept telling myself it was just nerves, that I wasn't used to being this isolated. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling. I tried not to look directly at the headstones around me, but every now and then my eyes would drift to one or the other, and I'd get this weird sense that something was just barely out of place. I put out the fire and crawled into my tent around 10 p.m. I lay there in the dark, fully dressed inside my sleeping bag, my boots by my head and my torch within reach. The ground was uneven beneath me, and I could feel small roots and pebbles digging into my back. I pulled the sleeping bag tighter around my shoulders and tried to relax, listening to the wind picking up again, gently this time, like it was brushing through the trees on purpose. At some point, I must have drifted off because the next thing I remember was waking up in pitch darkness. No moonlight, no sound. My watch said 3:14 a.m. I wasn't sure what had woken me, but I was instantly alert. That thick silence was back, heavier this time. Even the trees weren't moving. Then I heard something. Not loud, not fast, just this quiet, slow crunching, like someone stepping on dry leaves, carefully, deliberately. I held my breath, listening. The sound wasn't far, maybe 20 feet away, near the edge of the graves. But it didn't come closer. It would move a little, then stop. Move again, stop. Like someone was circling the tent, but not too close. I stayed completely still, my ears straining. I didn't move an inch. I didn't want to make a sound. I reached for the torch, but my hand was shaking. I couldn't bring myself to turn it on. The noise continued. Sometimes it sounded like a person, other times like an animal. It wasn't frantic or aggressive. It was controlled, intentional. That was what scared me the most. Whatever it wasn't wandering. It was moving with purpose. At one point, it stopped completely. For almost 10 minutes, there was nothing. Just me lying there, eyes wide open, heart racing. I waited, hoping it was gone. Then I heard it again. Closer now. I thought I heard breathing, but I wasn't sure. Could have been whined through the trees, but it felt too close. I gripped the torch tight and finally clicked it on, shining it through the thin green fabric of the tent wall. The light didn't show anything at first, just shadows of leaves moving a little in the breeze. Then I noticed something, a shape, just the top of something, like the top of a head, right outside, maybe 2 feet from the tent, perfectly still. I froze again, holding the light steady. It didn't move. I don't know how long I stayed like that. Maybe 5 minutes, maybe more. Then, just like that, it was gone. Not with noise. It didn't run. It just wasn't there anymore. I didn't sleep again that night. I kept the torch on the rest of the time, and I didn't dare unzip the tent. Every little sound made me jump. When daylight finally came, the sun rising through the trees like a slow wave of relief, I crawled out stiff and shivering. I looked around carefully. There were footprints in the soft moss between the headstones. Not fresh, but recent enough. Heavy boots. Could have been mine, but they circled the tent, and I'd never done that. What shook me most wasn't just the footprints. It was something I found on a nearby grave, about 5 meters from where I'd slept. An old stone slab, partially sunken and split at the top. Laid out neatly on the stone was a small pile of things. A torn glove, a used matchstick, a bit of chewed gum still stuck to foil, and a smooth black pebble placed perfectly in the center. I hadn't seen it the day before. No chance I missed it. Someone had been there that night. Someone who didn't want to be seen. I packed up fast, barely eating, and walked until my legs hurt. I didn't stop until I hit the main road near Solly. I caught a ride with a local farmer heading into Clitheroe and never spoke a word about it. It's been years now, but I haven't camped alone since. I've gone hiking, sure, but I always stop before dark. I stay near people. I check maps. I never camp near graveyards, and I never ignore that feeling when something feels off. That night didn't make me believe in the supernatural or anything like that. It made me believe in people. The quiet kind, the watching kind, the ones who leave no trace except a footprint, or a pile of trash arranged like a message you can't understand. That was the last night I went looking for peace in the middle of nowhere. Some places just don't want you there, and if you ignore the signs, you'll find out why when it's too dark to do anything about it. It was late September 2013. I had just turned 28 and decided to take a short solo camping trip to clear my head. I was working long hours at the time, barely getting any rest, and things at home weren't any better. My flat in Norwich felt too cramped. I just needed a bit of silence and distance, nothing fancy. I packed light, just a backpack with a small tent, a knife, a bit of food, a bottle of water, a flashlight, a small stove, and a new sleeping bag I'd only used once before. I'd been researching places to go that were quiet but not too far out of reach. I remembered a chalk quarry near Little Barningham, a small village in Norfolk, which I used to explore as a teenager. The quarry had been shut down for years, but you could still walk the footpaths nearby, and it was rare to see anyone out there. The whole place was surrounded by a thin line of trees, and once you got down into the quarry floor, you couldn't see anything beyond the tall, jagged white walls. It was wide and open in the middle, but ringed by scrub and sharp rock. The place had a strange stillness to it that always made me feel like time had paused. I parked a short walk from the tree line and made my way in on foot just before sunset. The ground was soft with damp leaves and patches of dry grass. I found a relatively flat patch of dirt near the far edge of the quarry floor and set up my tent. There were no real signs of recent activity. No trash, no tracks, nothing out of place. The sun dropped quickly behind the cliffs, and everything dimmed fast. It was colder than I thought it would be, and the wind carried a strange whistle when it passed over the cliff edges. Still, I wasn't uneasy yet. I'd slept in worse places. By the time I got my fire going, I was shivering. I ate a can of beans straight from the tin and sat with my back against a rock, watching the shadows shift on the quarry walls. I remember how quiet it was, completely silent except for the occasional creak of a tree or the low thump of a rock falling somewhere off in the distance. There were no birds, no insects, nothing moving in the dark. That's when I started to feel it, the first hint of something being off. Around 9 or so, I noticed a sound. It was faint, but steady, like a soft scraping or dragging, far off. I thought maybe it was a branch moving in the wind, but the wind had stopped. That's what made it worse. The air was still, and the sound didn't come and go like a branch swinging. Kept going, a light scrape, then a pause, then another scrape, like something was being pulled across the quarry floor slowly, inch by inch. I turned off my little camp stove and killed the fire just to listen. Everything went pitch black, and I sat still in the dark with my ears straining. The sound was gone. For a while, there was nothing again. I told myself it was probably a rabbit or fox dragging something through the brush, and I got into the tent. But I didn't sleep. An hour or so later, I heard it again. This time it was closer, louder, more deliberate. Drag, pause. Drag, pause. It was coming from the direction of the narrow path I'd used to come in. I froze in my sleeping bag, heart pounding so loud I was sure whatever it was could hear it. I slowly reached for the zipper of the tent and opened it just an inch, peeking out. I couldn't see anything. It was too dark, and the moon wasn't strong enough to light up the quarry floor. But I heard breathing just once, like a short grunt. Then it stopped. I waited for over an hour, barely moving, trying to control my breathing. My knife was in my boot outside the sleeping bag, and I didn't dare reach for it. At some point, the sound moved again, further off now. A few more dragging noises, then silence. That's when I heard a soft metallic clink. It was impossible to tell exactly where it came from, but it wasn't natural. Nothing in that place should have made that sound. I lay there for the rest of the night, not sleeping a second. I didn't hear anything else, but that deep quiet returned, even heavier than before. At the first crack of light, I got out and packed everything fast. My fingers were stiff from the cold, but I forced them to move. I didn't even eat. I just wanted to be gone. But when I walked the path back toward my car, I saw something that stopped me in my tracks. There were deep grooves in the dirt near the edge of the quarry path. 2 long lines, almost like something had been dragged. They weren't there the night before. They led to a flat spot of ground that looked recently disturbed, like someone had sat or laid there. And there were boot prints. Not hiking boots, either work boots, heavier, wider, and deep in the soft dirt like whoever wore them was carrying something heavy. They came from the treeline and stopped about 20 feet from where my tent had been. Then they turned back. I followed them with my eyes all the way back toward the trees but saw no more signs. No dropped items, no trash, just that disturbed ground and those grooves. I didn't run, but I walked fast the whole way back to the car. I got in, locked the doors, and didn't look back until I hit the main road. Later, when I thought about it, I realized that someone might have been watching me from the moment I got there. The quarry was full of blind spots, and I didn't check all of them. I had walked in thinking I was alone, but it's too easy to hide in a place like that. The sounds I heard, the dragging, the metallic clinks, it wasn't wildlife. It wasn't weather. Someone was out there, and I think they came very close to doing something to me. I never went back to that quarry, not even in the daylight. I never reported anything either. What would I say? I heard dragging noises in the dark and found boot prints. There wasn't a crime. Nothing was taken. No one was hurt. But I know I wasn't alone out there. The most terrifying thing isn't what I saw, it's what I didn't. Whoever was out there didn't want to be seen. They stayed just close enough to let me know they were there, then backed off. That kind of patience, that kind of control, that's what haunts me. Now, anytime I even think about camping, I remember that sound. That slow drag, like something heavy being pulled across dirt. I still don't know what they wanted. Maybe they were just watching. Maybe they changed their mind. Maybe they're still out there, waiting for someone else to camp alone near that quarry. I don't take chances anymore. I stick to campsites near towns, places with cameras and people. But nothing really makes me feel safe the way I used to, because now I know for sure that there are people out there who don't make a sound until it's too late. It was September of 2016 when I decided to take a short camping trip by myself. I was 28 back then, still living in Leeds, and had just gone through a messy breakup. I needed time away from everything, the noise, the traffic, the small talk at work. I wasn't looking for anything special, just peace. I picked a spot I'd read about online, an old trail that led up through the North York Moors, eventually reaching a place called Stone Shade Hollow. The name sounded made up, like something from a book, but I didn't care. It was remote and quiet, and that's what mattered. I left early on a Thursday morning. The forecast called for light rain that evening, but I didn't think much of it. I packed what I needed: a small tent, my sleeping bag, 2 days worth of food, a torch, spare batteries, and my old camping knife I kept more for nostalgia than anything. I didn't bring a phone charger. Part of me didn't even want the phone on. I wasn't planning on going far off the trail anyway. The walk took me through a patchwork of muddy paths and overgrown sections that hadn't seen boots in weeks. I followed an old forestry road, dodging nettles and ducking under drooping branches. After 5 or 6 miles, I came to a clearing that sloped gently down into a small hollow surrounded by tall pines. There were no signs of other campers, not even a fire ring or the usual beer cans left behind by bored teenagers. Felt untouched, which I liked. I pitched my tent on the driest patch I could find, a few meters from the tree line. I sat on a log with a tin of cold beans and watched the light fade out behind the trees. The clouds were already thickening, pressing down. The rain started as a drizzle around 7 p.m., soft and constant. I zipped up the tent and got into my sleeping bag with a book and my torch, feeling that familiar mix of calm and mild discomfort that always came the first night camping alone. Around 10 p.m., the rain got heavier. I could hear it tapping against the tent like tiny fingers, each gust of wind pushing against the sides. The ground softened beneath me as water seeped under the floor tarp. It wasn't anything dangerous, just uncomfortable. I didn't mind. I grew up hiking and camping with my dad and brothers. I'd been soaked through before, but sometime after midnight, I woke up cold and tense, and I knew something felt off. It wasn't a sound that woke me, not exactly. It was more like the absence of the right kind of sounds. The wind had died down completely. The rain was still falling, but now it was heavier and slower, hitting in long, steady drips like it was coming from the trees above, not the sky. That silence between each drop started getting to me. I lay there, frozen, listening hard. No rustling animals, no wind, no distant owl. Just the tent fabric creaking under its own weight and those long, heavy drips. Then I heard it. A low, soft crunch came from outside, maybe 10 feet from the tent. Then again, closer. It was the sound of a boot stepping into wet dirt. Slow, deliberate. I felt my stomach knot. I didn't move. I held my breath. I told myself it was an animal. A deer maybe a badger. But the steps didn't match that. Too heavy, too careful. There were 3 more steps. Then nothing. Whoever it was had stopped, just standing there. The rain masked everything, made it harder to place direction, but I could tell the steps were now on the left side of the tent, the side closest to the tree line. I reached quietly for the camping knife. It wasn't sharp enough to fight anyone, but holding it made me feel less helpless. I stayed still, breathing shallow, ears straining. Then came another sound, not a step. Something softer, a dragging noise, like something being pulled through wet leaves and mud. It went from left to right behind the tent. Then silence again. I knew I couldn't stay like that all night. My torch was within arm's reach, but I didn't dare switch it on. I didn't want to give away where I was looking. I stayed low, unmoving. Minutes passed, maybe longer. Suddenly, another step, this time right behind the tent. I wanted to shout, to say something to scare them off, but I remembered I was alone. If I was wrong, if it really was just some drunk local or a late hiker lost in the rain, maybe they'd go. But if I spoke up and they weren't lost, I didn't want to give them anything. Not my voice, not my fear. Another dragging sound. Closer. It stopped just behind where my head lay. I didn't breathe. Couldn't. Then, slowly, something pressed against the back of the tent. The shape of a hand. Not pushing in hard, just enough to let me see the outline through the fabric. Fingers splayed. It stayed there for maybe 5 seconds, then slowly pulled back. I didn't sleep at all after that. I waited, gripping the knife, listening for every sound. But the steps didn't return. The dragging didn't come back. Whoever had been out there, they didn't make another move. Eventually, around 4:30 a.m., the rain started to lighten. By 5 o'clock, the first gray light started pushing through the trees. I crawled out of the tent slowly, cold and stiff. Everything was soaked. My boots squelched in the mud. I turned around to check the back of the tent where the hand had pressed. No sign, but I walked in a circle around my site and found something else. About 15 feet from the tent, deep footprints led in from the tree line. The ground was too wet to preserve much detail, but they were clearly boots. Deep, heavy, wide apart. They came from the woods, circled the tent once, then disappeared back the same way. A thin groove ran alongside them, a dragging trail, like something had been pulled behind them. I didn't waste time packing. I shoved the wet tent into my bag without folding it. I left the rest. I just wanted to move, to get back on the trail, to put distance between me and that hollow. My heart was still thudding in my chest as I pushed through the undergrowth, barely looking where I was going. It took me over 4 hours to get back to the car. I didn't stop once. When I reached the road, I saw a parked 4x4 further down the shoulder, about 20 meters from where I'd left my own car. It was dark blue, old, covered in streaks of dried mud. No plates on it, just sitting there. I didn't look inside. I drove home soaked, silent, gripping the wheel tighter than I needed to. For weeks afterward, I searched online for any mention of crimes near that area. Nothing came up. No missing people.
No suspicious vehicles.
No attacks. But I know what I heard. I know what I saw. And I've never gone camping alone since. Not even once. And that old camping knife? I threw it in the bin the same day I got back. It had made me feel safer when I needed it, but looking back, I realized it wouldn't have done a thing. If someone really wanted to hurt me that night, they could have. They didn't, and that's what unsettles me the most. It was the summer of 2012, and I was 26. I had just quit a job I hated in Omaha and needed a break from everything. People, phones, deadlines. So I packed up my old Ford Explorer with basic gear. A small tent, some dry food, a cooler with water and beer, flashlight, sleeping bag, folding chair, and a hunting knife I kept mostly for peace of mind. I wasn't an expert camper, but I had done enough solo hikes and overnighters to feel confident. What I wanted more than anything was silence. I decided to head out to western Nebraska, far away from the city. I found a patch of forest land on the edge of a large stretch of private property. The nearest town was a 40-minute drive, and cell signal dropped completely 10 minutes before I even parked the truck. I liked that. The land wasn't an official campsite, just an old disused logging trail I followed deep into the woods until the path became too rough to drive. From there, I hiked with my pack for another hour until I found a good flat patch of land beside a small creek. The trees were dense on all sides, but the area was open enough to not feel trapped. It was perfect. No other hikers, no traffic, no sounds besides water and wind. I pitched my tent facing the creek and laid out a small ring of rocks for a fire. That first night, I sat by the flames and stared at the stars for hours. It was peaceful. I slept better than I had in months. The second day, I woke up just after sunrise and did nothing for hours. I fished in the creek, caught 2 small trout, and cooked them up for lunch. Around noon, I went on a long walk, exploring the woods and tracking where animal prints crossed into the mud near the water. It was simple, quiet, and exactly what I came for. That night, the fire crackled as I sat with a beer in hand, wrapped in my jacket, listening to the rustle of leaves and frogs. A few coyotes howled in the distance, but nothing close. I went to sleep a little later than usual, but with no worries in my head. I don't know why I woke up around 3 a.m., but I did. There was no sound, not even wind, and the fire I'd left glowing had died into cold ash. It was that kind of pitch dark where you can't see your hand in front of your face. I laid there, still half asleep, trying to figure out what had stirred me. Maybe a dream or maybe the cold, but I felt tense in my chest. Something wasn't right. I stayed frozen under my sleeping bag, listening. The woods were silent, too silent. That's when I heard it. A slow, dragging step on leaves. Then another. Then it stopped. Came from somewhere behind my tent. I held my breath, ears straining. Another step, closer this time. Not a deer. Too heavy. Too deliberate. Another step. Then silence. Then 2 steps. Slow and cautious, like someone trying not to be heard but not being careful enough. I didn't move. My knife was in my pack by the entrance of the tent, zipped up. My flashlight was at my feet, near my socks. I stayed there, frozen, listening. There was a pause, maybe 30 seconds or maybe 2 minutes, I couldn't tell. But then came the faint sound of something brushing against nylon. The wall of my tent rustled just once. I felt the hairs on my arms and neck rise. I didn't breathe. Then silence. I waited. No more sounds. After what felt like forever, I slowly reached for my flashlight and clicked it on. Nothing inside the tent. I carefully unzipped the entrance and shined the light out. The forest in front of me was empty. Trees, brush, my fire pit, the creek. Nothing moved. I didn't step out, but I swept the light around the back of the tent. I couldn't see anything. No footsteps. No animals. I waited another 10 minutes, staring, then zipped up and stayed up until the sun came up. That morning, I found something odd. About 30 feet from my tent, behind a tree, there was a boot print in the mud. It wasn't mine. Too big, too wide, and I was wearing trail shoes, not boots. I followed the print and found another 2 like it, leading toward the slope behind the creek. After that, nothing. No broken branches, no more footprints. Just those 3, like someone had stood still and then vanished. I didn't like it, but I told myself it might have been an old mark, or maybe a hunter passing through. Still, I packed my gear up early and decided to hike a bit farther north. I didn't want to head home just yet, but I didn't want to stay in that exact spot either. I moved about 2 miles upriver and found a clearing near some large rocks. There was no sign anyone had ever camped there. No trash, no paths, just flat ground and a high view of the creek below. I set up again, this time keeping my flashlight and knife within arm's reach. That night, I kept the fire burning higher and stayed up late, listening. Nothing happened. The next morning, I felt better. Maybe I'd overreacted. Maybe the print was old. Maybe I had just spooked myself. But when I walked to the creek that day, something caught my eye on the far side of the water. A small bundle of sticks, stacked vertically in a triangle shape. I stared at it for a long time. It wasn't natural. Someone had placed them that way, right at the edge of the water. I crossed over, careful on the rocks, and checked it out. The sticks weren't just stacked, they were tied with twine. That's when I knew someone had been watching me. I looked around, slowly turning. Nothing moved, but I felt it again, like eyes on my back. I kicked the sticks apart and went straight back to my tent. I didn't bother packing fully. I grabbed my bag, collapsed the tent without rolling it up, and shoved everything into the truck. I drove fast down that rough trail, bottoming out twice and not caring. I didn't stop until I reached a gas station near North Platte and sat there in the lot for over an hour. It's been years since that trip. I haven't been back to that part of Nebraska. I still camp sometimes, but never alone anymore. I think about that print, that sound behind my tent, the sticks tied with twine. Whoever it was, they never spoke, never came out, never showed themselves. But they knew I was there. They watched me sleep. They walked around my tent at night. They left a mark by the creek like some kind of message. I don't know what they wanted, if it was a warning or something worse. But I know one thing, they were real, and they were close, and they weren't just passing through. It was in the summer of 2011 when I decided to take a solo camping trip across the Peak District in England. I was 29 years old at the time, living in Sheffield, and working a desk job that drained me more than I like to admit. I'd always had this urge to disconnect, to get away from the buzz of the city and breathe real air for once. I didn't want to go to a popular spot either, nothing crowded with hikers and kids yelling near waterfalls. I wanted somewhere quiet, somewhere out of the way, even if it meant a rougher experience. I ended up settling on an area called the Upper Derwent Valley. I'd found a tiny, tucked-away patch of woods on an old Ordnance Survey map that looked like it wasn't connected to any of the usual walking routes. It was far from the car parks and the noise. I figured if I went deep enough, I'd be able to camp without anyone even knowing I was there. That was the whole idea. I didn't tell anyone exactly where I'd be, just said I was going to the peaks for a few nights. I got there early on a Thursday morning, parked near Fairholmes, then loaded my rucksack with a small tent, stove, water, and food. I didn't bring a phone. I didn't want it. I crossed the moorlands and followed the side of a long, narrow reservoir, then cut through the heather and found a spot under a cluster of gnarled old trees. No trails, no people, no sound except birds and the wind. It was perfect. The first night went smoothly. I set up my tent just before dark, made some tea on the small stove, and read until I couldn't keep my eyes open. I slept better than I had in months. There was something about being away from screens and city sounds that made it easier to breathe. On the second night, it started raining just after sunset. I was inside the tent by then, so it didn't bother me. I liked the sound of the water hitting the nylon. I drifted off again without trouble. But I woke up around 2 in the morning because something snapped outside. It wasn't thunder or wind. It was the sound of a branch breaking. I sat up and listened. First, it was quiet. Then there was another sound, closer this time, like something brushing through the undergrowth. It wasn't an animal. Animals move differently. They scurry or hop or stalk. This was heavier. It was spaced out. Step, pause, step. I stayed still and held my breath. The rain had slowed to a light drizzle, and through the thin tent walls I could hear clearer now. The steps stopped about 20 feet from where I was. I didn't move. I didn't even unzip the flap. After maybe a minute, there was nothing. Just silence. Eventually, I convinced myself it had been a deer or a fox and went back to sleep, though not as easily. The next morning, I stepped outside and looked around. There were footprints. Not boot prints exactly, but definitely shoe prints, worn down trainers, I guessed. They weren't mine. Mine were deeper, from heavier boots, and went in a different direction. These came in from the woods, circled my tent, then went back the way they came. I followed them for maybe 10 yards before they disappeared into a wet patch of moss and pine needles. My stomach knotted up. I didn't pack up, though. I told myself again it could have been someone just walking through. Someone lost. Maybe another wild camper. Still, the fact that they hadn't said anything, hadn't made themselves known, didn't sit right with me. That day, I kept close to camp. I boiled some soup, went down to the reservoir edge to collect more water, and tried to distract myself with a book. I didn't relax. Not really. The woods were too quiet. Everything felt too still, like the place was holding its breath. That night, I didn't sleep well. I stayed up longer than usual, eyes darting around the dark. I kept the rain cover half off so I could see the silhouettes of the trees outside. Around midnight, I finally laid down, wrapped tight in my sleeping bag, hoping exhaustion would knock me out. I don't know what time it was, but I woke up again. This time I heard nothing, no branches, no steps, just breathing. It was faint at first. I thought it was mine echoing back off the tent, but it wasn't. Came from outside. Slow, steady, shallow, like someone trying to be quiet. My whole body tensed. I didn't even blink. The sound was right outside the tent flap, barely a meter away. I didn't have a weapon, just a multi-tool in my bag. I reached for it slowly, not daring to unzip anything. I waited. The breathing kept going. Not louder, just there, steady. Then a shadow moved across the tent wall. It wasn't an animal. It was tall, taller than me. I could make out the shape of a shoulder, the side of a head. It leaned closer to the fabric like it was trying to listen for something. I didn't move. I didn't make a sound. Eventually, the shadow backed away. The breathing faded. A minute passed, then 2. I counted out 10 full minutes before I even moved to sit up. I stayed inside until dawn. Didn't sleep at all. When light broke, I opened the flap and stepped out slowly. Nothing, but those footprints were back. New ones this time. Again, they circled the tent, closer than the ones from the day before. At one point, the prints stopped just outside the entrance, like whoever it was had crouched down to look inside. That was it. I packed everything up in 15 minutes and started walking. I didn't stop for a break. I didn't eat. I just kept going. The whole way back, I felt watched. Every sound made me spin around. Once, I swear I saw someone in the trees, just a glimpse of a figure standing still between 2 oaks. But when I blinked, it was gone. I reached the car hours later, soaked in sweat, legs aching. I didn't even take off my pack, just threw it in the back seat and drove. I kept checking the rearview mirror every few minutes until I got back to Sheffield. I didn't tell anyone about it at first. I felt stupid. What was I going to say? That someone watched me sleep and walked around my tent for 2 nights in the middle of nowhere? No one would believe me, but it happened. I know it did. A week later, I looked up missing person reports for the area. Nothing matched. No crimes either. Nothing unusual. Just the usual hikers and cyclists. I even called the ranger station anonymously and asked if anyone else had reported strange behavior or seen people camping off-trail. They said no. I haven't gone camping alone since. I've barely even gone hiking unless it's on a marked trail with other people around. I still think about it, though. That man, because it had to be a man, he didn't say anything, didn't try to take anything. He just watched. That's what stays with me the most. He didn't want anything. He was just there. And that's the scariest part. I was 32 when I decided to take a week off from work and go camping alone in the Black Hills of South Dakota. It was October 2019, and things in my life had been feeling heavy. I had gone through a breakup earlier that year, work had been rough, and I just needed to breathe away from everything. I'd done some solo camping before, nothing too extreme, but this time I wanted something quieter. I picked a place called Castle Peak Ridge. Not many people seemed to go there, and that was exactly what I was after. I parked my truck at a trailhead about 20 miles outside a small town called Hilford. From there, it was a solid 3-hour hike to where I wanted to pitch my tent. It wasn't part of any official campsite, just a clearing I had seen marked on a topographic map. It was near a small stream and backed up against a long wall of trees. I figured it would be peaceful. That first evening, I set up camp, made a small fire, and cooked some canned food. The air was cool and still. I heard a few owls, maybe a fox in the distance, but nothing else. I was alone out there, and I liked that. By the second day, I'd settled into the quiet. I spent the morning walking through the trees, following the stream that twisted around the ridge. I didn't see a single person. No footprints, no old wrappers, not even a broken twig that looked too fresh. It felt untouched. I spent the afternoon reading and carving small bits of wood to pass the time. Around sunset, I gathered more firewood and settled in for another quiet night. But something felt off that evening. I couldn't explain what it was. It wasn't a sound or anything I saw. It was just a shift in the way the forest felt around me. You spend enough time outside, you start to notice when something changes. The birds were quieter. Even the wind didn't seem to move the branches like before. I tried to brush it off. I ate, warmed up by the fire, and got into my sleeping bag when the temperature dropped. Around 2 a.m., I woke up. It was freezing cold, but that wasn't why I woke up. I had the heavy sense that someone was near. My heart was already racing, and I hadn't even heard anything yet. I stayed still in my sleeping bag, trying to listen. Nothing at first. Then, after maybe 2 minutes, I heard a crack. A single footstep outside my tent. Then silence again. I didn't have a weapon, just a camping knife and a small hatchet I'd used for chopping wood. I slowly reached out to my backpack, keeping as quiet as possible, and grabbed the knife. I waited, holding my breath. Another step, this time closer to the back of the tent. Whoever or whatever it was, they were walking slowly around me. I didn't know if they could see the tent or if they had followed my trail here. My fire was out by then, and I hadn't left a lantern on. Everything was pitch dark except for the moonlight. I sat there in silence for what felt like forever. No more footsteps.
No voices.
Nothing. After half an hour of complete stillness, I finally forced myself to unzip the tent and peek outside. The forest was dark, and the cold air hit my face hard. I scanned the area with my small flashlight but saw nothing. No movement. No sign that anyone had been there. Still, I couldn't sleep the rest of the night. I stayed in the tent, knife in hand, listening. The next morning, I looked around the clearing. I found 2 footprints near the back of my tent, just a few feet away. They weren't mine. I was wearing hiking boots, and these prints were from a different kind of shoe, flatter, almost like work boots. They led away into the woods and disappeared near the stream. That was enough for me. I packed up camp in less than 15 minutes and headed back down the ridge trail. The whole time I was hiking back to the truck, I felt watched, like someone was just behind the trees, keeping pace with me. I never saw them. I didn't hear anything else, but I couldn't shake that feeling. Back at the truck, I drove straight into Hilford. I didn't stop. I didn't eat. I just kept driving until I hit the interstate, then drove another 2 hours before pulling into a rest stop. Only then did I allow myself to catch my breath. I sat in the truck for a long time, engine off, just staring out the windshield. I couldn't get those footprints out of my mind. They had been fresh, pressed deep in the dirt. Whoever had been outside my tent that night had been standing there while I was asleep, listening to me breathe, maybe watching through the nylon. I kept thinking about how easy it would have been for them to unzip the tent and do whatever they wanted. When I got back home, I checked online for anything about Castle Peak Ridge. Any stories, any missing person cases, anything strange. I didn't find much. A couple of old forum posts from hunters mentioning weird noises or strange tracks. Nothing concrete. One guy in a thread from 2012 said he felt like someone was watching him while he was out there, and he had left early. That was it. I didn't report it. What was I going to say? That I heard footsteps? That I found a couple of boot prints? I hadn't seen a face. I hadn't been attacked. But I know what I felt. I've done a lot of camping. You hear coyotes. You hear trees creak. This wasn't that. Someone was out there that night. Someone who moved slowly, quietly. Someone who didn't want to be seen. I haven't gone solo camping since. I still go outdoors, but always with a friend or two now, and never off the trail. I learned something out there that night. It's not the animals you need to worry about when you're in the middle of nowhere. It's the people. The ones who already know how to move without making a sound. The ones who don't need to speak to scare the hell out of you. The ones who wait in the dark and listen. That feeling I had, the shift in the air, the way the forest changed, it's never really left me. Every time I'm near the woods now, I catch myself pausing. I listen a little longer. I scan the trees a little harder. I know someone was out there. I don't know what they wanted, and maybe it's better I never found out. All I know is I wasn't as alone as I thought I was, and that changes the way I see everything now.